Welcome to Aberlady Bay in East Lothian. My name is Michael Thompson. I am part of the Gullane and Dirleton History Society, which is contributing this virtual walk to Archaeology Fortnight, run by the East Lothian Council Heritage Department. In 1939, at the beginning of World War II, the wide beaches and low sand dunes of the East Lothian coast were seen as vulnerable to the landing from the sea of troops and armoured vehicles, particularly at Gullane and here in Aberlady Bay. Fear of an invasion spurred the building and placement of defensive structures along the coast of England and Scotland. We shall be looking at the remains of these defences, as well as taking the opportunity to examine other sites of historical interest in the Aberlady Nature Reserve, which was the first to be opened in the United Kingdom in 1952. So if you are sitting comfortably, so to speak, we shall begin by crossing the access bridge across the Peffer Burn, which has a long history, being clearly marked on the OS 1854 6-inch map. The bridge has been destroyed by storms and on at least 2 occasions. Remains of previous bridges are still visible. A short distance along the path, we pause to hear about the history of this rather unimpressive mound. In October 1867, golfers who had been playing near Craigie Law asked Mr. Henry Hope of Loch Estate for permission to play to the north of the Peffer Burn. A course with 17 holes was laid out, and was, incredibly when looking at the terrain now, in use a month later. The members built a clubhouse, which was situated on this mound, and they appear to be posing around the 18th green, which was added in 1872, and thus the club became the 7th oldest 18-hole course. The northern part of this Loch Ness course wasn't on Hope land, so in 1893 Gullane Golf Club demanded rent that Mr. Hope refused to pay. He laid out a new course on his land to the east of the Gullane-Aberlady Road, which eventually opened as Loch Ness New Golf Club in 1894. For 4 years the two Loch Ness clubs operated separately, but in 1898 the old Loch Ness members moved to the other side of Aberlady Bay, on land owned by the Earl of Wemyss, to form the Kilspindie Golf Club. Some holes of the old Loch Ness course were incorporated into the Gullane Golf Club courses, and some were taken over by Loch Ness New Golf Club, but many were reclaimed by nature. Leaving the main path, we head towards the northern edge of the Peffer Burn estuary, but pause to notice this rectangular patch of waterlogged reeds. This is the remains of the original Aberlady Curling Club pond. It, too, is marked on the OS 1854 map, but there are few records of play taking place there, the club mainly holding their matches on the lake in Gosford Estate Park, where there is a fine, if somewhat eccentrically decorated, clubhouse. When we reach the northern edge of the Peffer Burn, we meet our first anti-tank block. These massive concrete structures were built on site in large numbers and arranged in rows to form a barrier to tanks and tracked vehicles. The remaining block here is at the northern end of a double row that crossed the Peffer Burn. They were placed diagonally to provide maximum resistance to any vehicle attempting to push them over, and usually arranged in double rows so that any teetering block would interlock with those behind. There is a well-preserved example of tank blocks on the hill to the west of Gullane Golf Course, where they stand 4 rows deep. Another type of anti-tank block is called a dragon's tooth, which is pyramidal in shape, but designed to serve the same purpose. These examples can be found along the coastal path, east of Gullane Beach. In the early 1960s, many blocks were removed and taken to Cockenzie, where they were used to build a seawall to protect the new power station then being built. During removal, some of these blocks broke off at ground level, and where they crossed the Peffer Burn, seaweed has taken advantage of the rough surface to grow in a square pattern. Moving north, we come to the Loch, which must have been considered a sufficient barrier, as the lines of blocks stopped at the southern end of the loch and restarted at the northern end. This aerial photograph, taken soon after the war, shows this clearly. As we move north again, we will see isolated blocks along the original line of the barrier, which have been retained as historical objects. Keep an eye open for deer as we head to the northwest corner of the reserve. As we emerge from the dunes, the vast expanse of sand of Aberlady Bay stretches before us. We have been careful about arranging for the tide to be out. We will head northwest towards the dark objects in the distance, which are the remains of XT craft or mini-submarines. As we walk towards the wrecks, there are a number of wooden stumps projecting out of the sand. They appear to be in lines. These are the remains of tall wooden poles fixed in concrete within large pipes. They were erected in 1939 and 1940 all over many beaches, including Gullane and Aberlady. These were placed to prevent landings by gliders carrying troops. This photograph, taken in 1940 on Gullane Beach, shows the poles in place. Remains of these concrete-filled pipes reappear from time to time on the beach. Further on we come to Willys Jeep. The amount seen of this old vehicle varies with each tide, but sometimes the chassis, transmission and engine block are visible at others only the upper wheels show above the sand. It is not recorded how it came to be there. Finally we reach the first of the XT craft. Strictly speaking, these were offensive weapons carrying 2 side cargoes of the explosive Amatol. These wrecks were the training version of the type of mini-submarines that were famously used to sink the Tirpitz battleship in 1943. The XT craft, 51 feet long and only 5.5 feet in diameter, were built in 1944 by Vickers at Barrow-in-Furness, but never saw active service. These ships had a crew of 4 packed into this small tube which didn't have a toilet. Ian Ballantyne, in his book The Deadly Trade, explains that the crews didn't eat much food because the more you eat, the more you've got to pass through you, and that presented a problem. There was no water to wash with, so, he says, it wasn't long before a lovely aroma spread through the boat, and it smelled like new-mown hay, after it had passed through a horse. Life in an XT craft, he writes, was like being locked in a coffin. After the war in 1946, these two XT craft were brought here and moored to this pile of old tank blocks and used for trials of 20mm ammunition fired from cannons mounted in aeroplanes. The used cartridges are a common finding by metal detectorists in the sand along the flight path for these experimental attacks. We will head back, as Aberlady Sands is no place to be when the tide comes in. On the way, we will visit one of the several skeletons of ships wrecked on the sands. These are mostly the remains of ketches, which were the workhorses of coastal trade in the 19th century. In October 1889, the Gratitude was carrying gas coal when it ran aground on Aberlady Sands. Even though the cargo was laboriously offloaded, the ship could not be refloated. It is not certain which of several wrecks in the bay is the Gratitude, but like Willys Jeep, the amount of these relics showing above the sand changes with every tide. It only remains for us to return to the main road along the same path. I hope you have found this walk interesting, but should you want a little more information, the Gullane and Dirleton History Society has a small booklet entitled East Lothian Defences in World War II, which, for a mere £1, can be purchased through the Society's website at the address shown here. Thank you for joining me on this walk today.